Brace yourself for a revelation. This is the moment an avoidant realizes they lost you. This will happen. Let us wander into the very heart of that experience, that curious crossroads where longing, self-protection, and regret all stand side by side, waiting to unfold. The stage is set with emotional fireworks in the making. For once, an avoidant grasps that they cannot simply circle back at their leisure. Something truly extraordinary occurs. Now, imagine a scene from my own life. Well, an amalgam of real stories and the trifles of old acquaintances, where at dinner parties I've sat across from dear souls who were mystified by a romantic partner's sudden withdrawal. You know, those intriguing individuals who vanish the moment they sense too much closeness. They maintain a poised exterior, recite cunning lines about independence, and prefer to remain continents away from that dreaded notion of emotional vulnerability. Yet occasionally, these very people come face to face with the startling realization that they've lost someone they assumed would always be there. Someone who has quietly slipped through their tightly guarded perimeter. The fallout, my friends, is a remarkable thing to behold. Let us consider the spiral, or circle if you prefer, of the avoidant experience. It begins innocently enough. They crave a semblance of companionship. They find someone, and there is that initial romantic rush, bright, shining, loaded with promise. Oh, how they relish it. They'll indulge, they'll beam. It might feel like a new dawn, but the trouble lurks beneath. Intimacy, you see, is no small foe in the mind of the avoidant. To them, love signals entanglement. They become convinced that any deeper bond means surrendering all independence. It's as though they stand clutching a prized heirloom, guarding it against the slightest suggestion that it be placed on a shared mantle. That precious heirloom is their solitary sense of self. Having watched this saga unfold countless times, I've likened it to an endless quest for honeymoon moments. When the euphoria of new love dims, because genuine commitment fosters real intimacy, our avoidant friend says, "Ah, no, not for me," and promptly withdraws. It is not a conscious cruelty. Often they are only half aware of their own motives, whether it's the so-called dismissive or fearful avoidant style. They sense closeness tugging at them, threatening the independence they've sworn to protect, and so they disengage. In simpler language, they leave. That, of course, is only the midpoint in their remarkable cycle. At first, they experience what has been termed separation elation, a surge of relief after a breakup, as though someone has unshackled them from the burdens of romantic expectations. In that early window of time, they saunter about feeling almost triumphant. Free at last, no more hand-holding or needless questions about my emotional state. You might liken it to a hiker cresting the top of a mountain, arms outstretched, savoring that exhilarating air. Only it rarely stays that way for long. Give them space, and a new thread starts to unravel. I recall a small poll taken by a diligent researcher in our midst who discovered that of tens of thousands responding to a simple question, "What is your ex's attachment style?" A striking majority pegged that ex-partner as an avoidant. Yes, indeed, dismissive or fearful. In other words, it's a phenomenon more common than one might guess. How many times must we hear from the lovelorn? But they seemed so affectionate in the beginning. Now they've cut me off and act as though I never existed. Will they ever come back? The short answer? Possibly yes, but only once they taste what it truly means to lose you. Observe our avoidant after they have concluded their initial burst of freedom. Perhaps they tried to leap into another infatuation, a rebound or two, hoping to recreate that early excitement. Some do find a fleeting spark again. Others, however, do not. Suddenly, the honeymoon glow fades. Sooner or later, the old echoes drift back into their thoughts. Curiously, they begin to reminisce. They recall what they loved about you, your laughter, your little routines, the way you opened their world in small but profound ways. A memory surfaces, perhaps one of your last meaningful moments together. A pang of regret follows. This is where the real shift begins, and for many of them, it's shocking. They are used to casting emotional ties aside. They're not accustomed to missing anyone. Yet they realize that someone they once relied upon for easy comfort is now truly gone. At times, an avoidant will conjure up what we call a phantom ex. Perhaps that's you, or in some cases, a figure from their remote past. People sometimes assume there can only be one grand phantom ex, but as life meanders on, an avoidant can create multiple illusions. Some might be ex-partners, others might be mere daydreams of what a person ought to be. Each is a ghostly ideal, polished in the mind's eye. When the cold, real world proves that perfect union to be impossible, they drift to the next. Yet something interesting happens when it dawns on them that you, specifically, are no longer waiting, no longer perched outside the gates of their guarded life. The avoidant, who is so adept at pushing away, finds they cannot waltz back in at will. It is then they realize your presence in their life was not an endlessly renewable resource. When that certainty settles, you see a glimmer of humility. Consider the great waves of human emotion: pride, sorrow, contrition, longing. It all floods in at once, and for a moment the unthinkable occurs. They truly feel. It does not always manifest as an obvious meltdown. Avoidants are skillful at hiding themselves, but inside they sense that dreaded vulnerability creeping up. A pang in the chest, the faint taste of old memories, the unstoppable flutter of reflection. Why, they ask, did I cast aside this connection? They might stand in front of a mirror, expression pensive, mind racing. Sometimes it leads them to roam social media or dash off a hesitant text to see if you're there. Or they might remain quiet, swirling in private turmoil. But do not be fooled. It is typically the absence of your longing, the fact that you've reclaimed your life and sense of self, that pries open this window in their heart. If you were to flood their phone with anxious texts and pleas for attention, it would only confirm the old narrative. I left because I was losing my independence. That would allow them to dwell comfortably in their illusions and remain in that circle of on-again, off-again euphoria. But the moment they notice you've become genuinely unreachable, that your life has moved on, or that you are, in fact, living well without them, that moment wakes them from their slumber. They realize they must either face the truth or bury it deeper. And it is in this crossroads that, for a flicker of time, the door to real change can open. I once knew someone years ago who had perfected this escape cycle. We would speak, and he'd boast about how he'd left a partner and felt liberated. "No ball and chain for me," he'd say, practically beaming with relief. But a few months later, his face was ashen, racked with unspoken regret. When pressed, he admitted that she, his once cherished companion, had quietly slipped away from his social circle, found new connections, and never once looked back. This knowledge haunted him. He was unwilling to let on how deeply it stung. But in one rare, confessional moment, he revealed just how hollow his grand independence felt. For all his bravado, he had never anticipated that she might refuse to wait for him. Suddenly, those memories of her tenderness, her gentle understanding, became something precious he no longer had. He confessed, "I let her slip through my fingers. Had she tried to bombard him with pleas and tears, he'd have felt justified in keeping his distance. But her silent and dignified departure was a far harsher blow to his self-assurance." That is the fulcrum point, ladies and gentlemen. where the scales tip. When an avoidant suffers that blow, when they see that you are not in the wings, but have truly stepped off stage, they begin to question their own beliefs. In this lies the root of that tremendous shift. It might lead them to attempt reconciliation, or it may lead them into a spiral of introspection. For some, it sparks genuine growth. For others, old habits die hard, and the cycle soon restarts. Yet in either case, one cannot deny that a momentous shift transpires the instant they realize they have lost you for real. Look closely the next time you suspect an avoidant has discovered your absence. You might spot subtle tremors in their demeanor, less arrogance, more reflection. Perhaps they grow curious about your life, hearing whispers from a friend. Perhaps they gently probe your social presence to see if you're happy, if you still think of them. With that realization of loss, a door, long blocked by fear, cracks open. Whether they walk through it or swiftly barricade it again depends on them. But that fleeting moment, that raw instant, is exactly where everything changes. And therein lies the truth of our title, the moment an avoidant realizes they lost you. This will happen. It is not a static point, but an upheaval in perspective. In the end, an avoidant may find a measure of courage to mend old wounds, or they might recede once again into their fortress of solitude. But we can be certain that when they comprehend your life is no longer tethered to theirs, they cannot remain unaffected. The illusions and mental guardrails that once sheltered them crack under the weight of truth. Within that crack lies the faintest glimmer of redemption, and it all begins when they face the singular shock of losing you.
If you believe this video might help someone dear to you, share it with them. A small gesture on your part could mean the world to a friend in need.